Police officers of Reddit, what criminal actually impressed you with their criminal skills? I locked up a guy a few years ago, and he had an unusual crime on his criminal history: theft of an ATM. I asked him about it, and he told me that with 4 of his other friends, they all turned up at a local bank in overalls with a large truck. They asked for the manager and told him, "We're here to repair the ATM," and the manager helped them load the ATM onto the truck, full of cash, and they drove away. He got snapped when his girlfriend got mad at him and turned him in. Number 2. This guy in high school, we'll call him Lewis, was a known drug dealer. He didn't make it a secret though. Everyone bought weed off of him, and harder stuff too. The cops constantly pulled him over to search him, and whenever a drug-related thing happened at school, he was often the first kid they pulled into the principal's office. But they would never catch him with any drugs. The principal used to turn all of his possessions inside out on a weekly basis. Apparently, schools can do that, but cops can't. They would frequently cut locks off his gym locker and regular locker in hopes of finding his stash, but they never found it. One time, there was a rumor going around that his stash was stored in a locker not assigned to anyone, which prompted the administration to search every single locker in the school. I remember we had to stand in the hallway and unlock it so the principal could have a look inside. They definitely caught people with drugs, but not Lewis. Turns out he started that rumor. Drug dogs were a regular occurrence. Once a month, they brought them into the school and they were present at every sports game. Lewis was one of the only, if not the sole supplier for the whole school. The whole administration had no idea what to do. They would catch kids with weed, and the kids would flat out say, "I bought this from Lewis," and Lewis would encourage them to say it. They would then flip Lewis's stuff inside out. Cops would search his car, and he consented to all of it, and laughed when they found nothing. This was probably close to 15 years ago now. The vice principal loves to tell the story about how they eventually caught him. The vice principal's younger son asked for these shoes for Christmas that had a secret compartment in them. So light bulbs go off in his head. The first day after holiday break, he calls the school's DARE officer and pulls Lewis out of class. They bring him into office and flip all of his stuff inside out on the table. Then, the vice principal tells him to take his shoes off. Turns out his hunch was right. He had a hidden compartment in his shoes. But there were no drugs in there. I guess Lewis is laughing his ass off at this point. This was pre-everyone owning a cell phone era. Lewis then has the audacity to explain that he hasn't seen any of his classmates for 3 weeks, so he had not taken any orders yet. Had the vice principal just waited a single day, he probably would have caught him. Number 3. Saw this one on one of those police chase shows. Police dash cams showed this car in front of them was swerving all over the road in the middle of the night. He followed him for a while, then flipped on the lights to pull him over. The guy pulls over, and before the cop can do anything, he turns off the car, gets out, throws the keys into the woods, cracks open a brand new Fit the vodka, and chugs the whole thing down. Cut to the interview of the actual criminal with his voice and face obscured. He said he had already had multiple DUIs and had become something of an expert on drunk driving laws. He took advantage of a loophole wherein the cop didn't have to see if he was actually drunk behind the wheel of the car. Chugging the vodka right there would immediately have an effect on any sobriety testing. He hadn't opened the vodka in the car, so no container infraction. And he made sure his keys were most definitely out of reach, so there was no way that he could be operating a vehicle under the influence. Didn't know whether to be impressed or disgusted with his drunken ingenuity. Number 4. Although no skill was really involved, I arrested a kid for stealing a car. He confessed and told me that he'd be straight up with me. He was walking through a parking lot and saw a lady drop her car keys and kept walking. He said that it was her fault for not paying attention, so he grabbed the keys and took off in her car. He lamented that he knew that he would get stopped eventually, but didn't think we'd stop him so quickly. When I asked him if he had a driver's license, he smiled and said he was planning to take the car he stole to the DMV so he could take his driving test. We both had a good laugh at that. He said I ruined his plans. Number 5. A fire marshal once told me about his nemesis, a firebug, naturally. Apparently, the arsonist had a thing for burning old barns. Never a building that was in use, always an old, abandoned one. Anyway, his modus operandi was to take a balloon filled with accelerant, like gasoline or kerosene, and suspend it by a string 20 feet off the ground. Under the balloon, he'd light a candle and start the balloon swinging on a long arc. He'd have a good 20+ minutes before the arc of the swing slowed enough that the candle would ignite the balloon. The balloon then ignites, the accelerant is spread evenly across all surfaces, and the balloon, string, and candle disappear in the fire. It was like the interior of the structure caught fire at the same time, with no trace as to how. He said it was nearly a perfect crime, until some cop happened to notice a car in a field a mile away and thinks to jot down the license plate number. Number 6. I was an MP at Fort Carson. The young man was in the service for 2 years before a dishonorable discharge, sending him back home to Pennsylvania. When he got home, he used his uniform to get discounts and praise. One day, he decided to hop on a plane to Colorado. He arrives in full uniform, but with the lieutenant rank on. Gets off the plane and uses the government transportation to get on base. He doesn't have an ID on him, but he is an officer, so they let him in. Then he stayed at the in-processing barracks without paperwork, because hell, he is an officer. He stays there for weeks. He goes walking to the PX and comes across a woman with a flat tire. He helps her change it out and she invites him over for dinner. There, he meets her husband and their kids and then convinces them that he is waiting for housing and they let him live with them for a month. He cleans the house and babysits the kids. One time, he even went to this guy's unit and chewed out a supply sergeant out to help the guy he was living with. The only reason this came to light is because one phone call he made to his mother for the in-processing barracks. She became worried about him and then called them. His mother let the people know he was not in the military. After that, the search began. I was an MPI and got to pick him up. He gave me a straightforward statement and was genuinely nice. I just remember sitting on the office couch with him, watching TV, waiting for him to get transferred from my custody. I told him that I was genuinely impressed and that after what even happens to him happens, that he could get it together and do well. He wasn't the brightest kid, but he had balls. I guess that is what it really takes. Number 7. Once had a guy who shoplifted on an industrial scale. He stole hundreds and sometimes thousands of pounds worth of merchandise from a particularly well-known high street clothing store every day. He'd go to different branches all over the country, UK obviously, and he spoke nicely and was smartly dressed. He just used to fill up bags with high-value products and walk out. He had a warehouse-type unit somewhere, and police never found it, with his own till, because he would generate till receipts for those items and go back to return them at a different branch and get cash refunds. He was at it for years, made enough to put his kids through private school. When he got caught, he was jailed for about a year. Our shoplifting sentencing guidelines are absurdly low. When he came out, he got back to it. Police still couldn't find his base. He was being investigated and was on bail. On one occasion, when he answered his bail at the police station, the police had a 6-man surveillance team ready to tail him and track down the warehouse he was using. He lost them within 2 minutes of leaving the station. When he came for trial based on the CCTV evidence we had from the various shops, the case got thrown out. The footage wasn't good enough to make out his features exactly, and the officer who purported to identify him hadn't followed procedures. After he was thus acquitted, he was due to be investigated for some other matters, but he gave the police and security the slip from the court before he could get arrested. Even I was impressed, and I was prosecuting him. Number 8. Had a guy when I first started would twist locks. The art of twisting a lock works mainly in businesses that secure their double front doors using a deadbolt style lock. He would use a tool to twist this lock and in turn open the doors. Guy probably got away with 25 businesses before he was finally busted. He later said his style of breaking and entering worked so well because the alarm systems have a set delay when opening a business, say 30 seconds. Given the glass wasn't broke or large movements were observed by the system, it would act as if the store were opening and give the employee time to reset the alarm. Those 30 seconds were plenty for him to get in, get to the register, and leave. Number 9. This has awoken some old stuff from a past life. Hopefully this is useful for some business owners. The disarm delay he mentioned is important. Getting in without triggering an immediate alarm isn't often difficult once you're in. What makes the difference between a quick grab, like mentioned above, and having several minutes is the audible alarm. Not going to go into timing when alarm companies register a call with the police department because that's not important. If you're in a place and the installed siren goes off, you've got to get out. A horn that's easy to locate and can be disconnected or filled with a quick shot of spray foam buys you easily 4 times the time. Lesson: put your keypad near the door. Keep your disarm delay low, Put your sirens high and not all in obvious places. If you're in a building that uses glass doors, make sure the main lock isn't a simple deadbolt style. You'd be amazed how much glass will flex. And make sure you have motion sensors above the ceiling, especially places that use drop ceilings. This is especially important in business complexes and office buildings that have various tenant types. Lesson: don't rely on adjacent security measures. You think that non-profit next door has the budget you do for security? You think a wall separates you? Pop your head up in the ceiling and take a look around. Number 10. We get a call reporting that the phone system of a major UK bank has been hacked and that the caller has had several £1,000s stolen from their account as a result. Seems unlikely, but officers went around to see what had happened. Obviously, the bank's system was fine, but scammers had done something fairly clever. Turns out that there is a way in the UK of keeping a phone line open when only the recipient hangs up. The scammers called the victim and pretended to be from the bank before asking for account details. The victim was suspicious, so hung up and called the bank back at their real telephone number. However, the scammers held the line open and played a dial tone down the line so the victim thought she was making a new call. They then played a ring sample before a new scammer answered the call and took the details, pretending to be the bank. I've heard of it a few times since in the press, but the first time I came across it, it was on duty, and no one had any idea what was going on. Number 11. No criminal skill per se, but I thought I'd contribute this story as it was quite impressive. I used to work with law enforcement, and during a Friday night, a guy on PCP managed to shut down a major roadway during a foot pursuit. This guy ended up taking several shots from a 9mm and a shotgun shell, and then wriggled out of the grasp of several officers trying to subdue him, and got into a police car and drove off with it. He only managed to get about 10 feet before crashing into a cement barrier and knocking himself unconscious. The guy ended up living too. PCP is a hell of a drug. Number 12. Not a cop, nor the criminal, but in the Blue Mountains of NSW, Australia, my now deceased uncle went on a string of armed robberies where he would run into a store with a gun, then shove the attendant against the wall and superglue their hands to the wall before stealing the money in the cash register. He had no intentions of using the gun, and it was actually never loaded. He just thought it would be funny to glue people to the wall and steal their stuff. Number 13. Criminal here that was complimented by police officers on my elusiveness. I was 13 years old and took my dad's truck out for a joyride while my parents were out of town for the night. I wasn't so good at driving stick and got pulled over. I ran for it. I hid in a field for half an hour or so while watching more and more police show up to investigate. When I heard the dogs, I knew it was my time to make it or break it. So I ran, and boy did I run. I made it to a road and hopped a fence into someone's yard, and hopped a few more fences. I was, and still am, very athletic. Lost the dogs, but the cruisers were everywhere. I made my way to my house, and there were cops on every corner of the street. But a bit of stealthy fence hopping, and I was at my basement window, and I crawled in, with the cops literally outside of my house. I gathered my things in the dark and was ready to head off to my buddy's place, but I was surrounded. 13-year-old me gave the police a very entertaining chase, and they even said so. I felt so complimented that they enjoyed the chase too. They also said I had no chance of getting away. I remember eating a grapefruit and trying to play it cool while they were questioning me. Number 14. Not an officer, but I remember a Forensic Files episode I saw once that impressed me. A doctor named John Schneeberger drugged his patient and sexually assaulted her during a visit or procedure. When she accused him of it after having a kit done, he willingly gave a blood sample, and the results came back as not a match. He did the test twice, but the second time he insisted they take it from a particular part of his arm, and the blood came out old. It turned out that he had a tube of another patient's blood sample implanted in his arm so that he would get away with it. He's a sick man, but that was pretty freaking clever. Number 15. Smartest criminal. Suspect would go door to door saying he was with Publishers Clearing House. He would tell people they were one of several finalists. He then explained he would need their name, date of birth, and social security number to verify who they were. After that, he would ask what hours they weren't home so they could ensure if the victim won the prize, they would be home. Naturally, he would break into their homes when they weren't home and steal all their valuables. To top it off, he would steal their identity and open a bunch of credit cards / payday loans in the names afterwards. After over 50 cases, I finally caught the guy. He made off with over $500,000 in 3 months before he was caught. Dumbest criminal. Suspect was robbing a gas station late at night. Suspect pointed a gun at the cashier demanding money. The cashier was surrounded by plexiglass all around. The cashier refused to give the money and hit the panic alarm, which locked the door. The suspect was angry and fired a shot at the cashier. The bullet ricocheted off the plexiglass and struck him in the forehead. The bullet knocked him unconscious but didn't penetrate the skull. As I arrived, the bullet was still protruding from his forehead and he was knocked out. He got 99 years for his stupidity. The best part was, the cash register only had $60 in it.